The Turks, without their overcoats, lost 25,000 men to the long cold before they saw any Russians. With temperatures at minus 30 degrees centigrade, an entire army vanished in the snow. With the spring thaw, the Russians found 30,000 dead Turks, and they estimated that another 20,000 wounded had crawled away to die or to be eaten by bears and wolves. Another 30,000 dead. So how did anyone win this war? How was victory possible? The price was already so high that by 1915 Germany was sending Belgian slave labor to work in German factories. And in Berlin, the war cabinet decided to permanently colonize much of Belgium and to turn Ostend into a German naval base for all time. This would effectively have made the Kaiser the admiral of the English Channel and the harbour master of the Port of London. It also made peace talks impossible. The war even became one of human sacrifice, not as a metaphor, but quite literally. In January 1915, on average, 40 British soldiers a day were being killed in sniping and artillery exchanges. But on January 25th, in a furiously intensified barrage, 393 were killed. The next day, the figures reverted to the average. On January 26th, as usual, the British High Command issued a communique announcing the previous day's casualties, representing an increase over the daily average of some 350 men. German newspapers were able, as intended by High Command, to report the enhanced British death toll of 350 lives on the morning of the 27th as a birthday present to the Kaiser. This is human sacrifice. In London, meanwhile, Winston Churchill took counsel with himself and thus advised, concluded that maybe an attack on Turkey's southern shores of the Gallipoli Peninsula would make military sense because it was a form of turning a flank. But the British had no intelligence about the landing places and no knowledge of the Turkish strength. On April 24th, an ominous date in Irish history, the expeditionary force closed on Gallipoli's shores, heading for the catastrophe that Churchill had so keenly anticipated. The ensuing campaign was to cost the Allies 100,000 lives before it ended in disaster and defeat. On August 21st, 1915, alone, 497 men of Irish regiments were killed in action. The lesson of the Western Front was being relearned yet again, that naked human flesh could not coexist with modern munitions. These munitions were taking a new form on that sinister day of April 24, near the Belgian cloth town of Ypres, as German engineers opened tanks of brutal crude fluorine gas onto British lines. The hour of mnemonic mass murder had finally arrived. Amongst the first positions to be attacked were held by the Canadian 8th Battalion, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Louis Lipset, the son of a humble shopkeeper from Ballyshannon, County Donegal. He ordered his men to soak handkerchiefs in their urine and to stand fast they did. 1,000 Canadian soldiers died in these first gas attacks a year before Hull. At least 40 of these were Irish. One of Lipset's men, Company Sergeant Major Frederick Hall from Kilkenny, won a posthumous Victoria Cross for his gallantry, trying to save the lives of his comrades. As a matter of curiosity, Louis Lipset was rapidly promoted and in October 1918 was General commanding the 4th British Infantry Division in northern France when he was fatally wounded while scouting German positions. Louis Lipson thus became the very last of the 120 British generals to be killed in the Great War. Meanwhile, men of Louis Lipson's parent regiment, the Royal Irish Regiment, along with the Royal Dublin Fusiliers and the Royal Irish Fusiliers, were variously thrown into the Ypres salient to hold the line alongside the Canadians. In the coming sordid month, the 2nd Battalion Dublin Fusiliers suffered over 100% casualties as replacements arrived for the dead and wounded and then joined either category. Their commanding officer, the headstrong Colonel Lovebrand, was certainly killed by his own men and perhaps not accidentally. Captain Basil McClear, an Irish rugby international who was used to play with white gloves and was famous for that, was another of the Dublin's dead. Amongst the hundreds of Irish fatalities was Private Morrow from Dungannon of the Royal Irish Fusiliers, like CSM Hall, posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross for being killed or for trying to rescue wounded colleagues and dying in the process. Another of the dead in this gas attack near Ypres was Lieutenant Hugh Patrick Shine, brother of the John Dennis Shine, who had been killed at Mons. I told you about him earlier on. The third and final Shine brother, James Owen, was to die on the gas-filled swamplands of Frasenburg Ridge in August 1917. Their mother, Kathleen, soon afterwards succumbed to whatever it is women die of when all their sons are dead. In that same gas attack, along with the Irish, the British and the Canadians, some 250 Indian soldiers of the Lahore Division were killed. Meanwhile, back in Lahore, following a vigorous campaign by the governor of Punjab against subversion, 46 Indians were executed. Another 114 were exiled for life for conspiring to end British rule in India. I repeat the figure, 46 were executed merely for conspiring to end British rule in India. And 114 were exiled for life. I don't know where they were exiled to, possibly temporarily, because the governor responsible for that was Michael O'Dwyer. Temporarily. Meanwhile, a vital lesson had already been learnt at Neuve-Chapelle, where the first German experiments in gas had failed. Merely by chance, in March 1915, the British had assembled enough guns to deliver the size of a bombardment necessary to make local victory possible. Simply for every yard of trench, one's own guns had to fire 300 pounds of shells. That is, allowing for overshoots and undershoots and duds. Every foot of trench required 100 pounds of shell. But at this stage of the war, no army had enough guns to deliver that vast amount of ammunition on their enemy positions. And that was the central equation for victory. Without it, an entrenched enemy could not be dislodged and would destroy attacking troops before they got within grenade range of the defenders. This is a lesson not yet learned. The failed attack on Oliver's Ridge in 1915 was the result, most famously by the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Munster Fusiliers. But the Munster's assault at Rue de Bois is only legendary because of the wonderful painting by Matania of the blessing by Father Gleeson. Actually, there was nothing special about the Munsters that day. On that same day, some 3,600 British soldiers were killed without a them. The Munsters lost 151 dead, to be sure, but the 2 battalions of the Northamptonshire Regiment lost 461, at least 43 of them aged 19 or under, the youngest 16. The 2nd Battalion, the Royal Sussex, lost 276 dead, and 34 Irishmen were to die with non-Irish regiments that day. One artillery officer on the Aubers front all day, who had been trained to identify vital German positions, failed to spot a single German machine gun, even as his slaughter was happening before his very eyes. And a few days later, the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Inniskillen Fusiliers, lost 241 men in a completely forgotten attack that matched anything on the first day of the Somme. Yet no officers were killed in this assault. This mysterious affair which has escaped the notice of military historians. 1915 thus sees the death of the old British Expeditionary Force and the Army Reserve, and now it was time for the new armies which had already been blooded in Gallipoli. However, Ireland's contribution to these new formations has at times been a little exaggerated. The 36th Ulster Division, based on the Ulster Volunteer Force, still required topping up, and the 16th Division was never the all-homogeneous and nationalist division that is often portrayed. The Royal Irish Regiment and the Royal Irish Rifles contained men from the Channel Islands, and both the Leinsters and the Royal Irish had sizable numbers of Englishmen from the West Country. Moreover, we now know that though the Irish National Volunteers had declared, in principle for John Redmond, in the Great Split in 1914 between the Irish Volunteers, and though their bands enthusiastically played off Irish regiments as they marched to the front, they did not enlist in vast numbers, perhaps about 50% of them. And of course, the pre-war backbone of the Irish National Volunteers had been Irish Army reservists, who were then called to the front. And by 1915, many of these men had left their bones on the Western Front. And then, overall, this contingent would be of little further use in Ireland's coming internal divisions. An analysis of the 16th Irish Division suggests that recruitment was based as much on adventurous and economic reasons as anything to do with nationalist principles or Little Belgium. Moreover, Redmond's policy of recruitment for the Allies meant that NCOs were absent from the communities which they might have otherwise have influenced. And the Republican minority who stayed behind not merely could argue their case over the coming years, they would also write the history of this time. Amongst the most distinguished of the nationally minded volunteers of the 16th Irish Division were, of course, Tom Kettle, formerly MP for Tyrone, Willie Murphy of Tullow, one of the most remarkable soldiers, Irish soldiers of the war, almost uniquely a battalion commander 2 years after tasting soldiering for the first time. And there was 18-year-old Second Lieutenant Emmett Dalton, who, out of patriotic reasons, had changed his first name from Ernest. And of course, there was Willie Redmond, MP for West Clare. His immediate superior officer was the far younger Edmund Roach Kelly, who himself was the grandson of a Home Rule MP for the same county. And Edmund was the husband of Kate Shine, the only surviving member of the 4 Shine children. The 16th Irish Division arrived in France battalion by battalion to be trained up by existing units there. They soon encountered those familiars of life on the Western Front: bitter cold, endless fatigue, and mind-numbing boredom, interspersed with brief interludes of random and murderous violence. But when the entire division was finally assembled, infantry, artillery, signals and logistics together, this was their consolation. They were on what was usually a relatively quiet part of the front in northern France, near the remains of the village,